Good morning and welcome to Boys Latin's annual Veterans Day ceremony. BL has been honoring our veterans with this ceremony, as best I can guess, over 30 years. I believe, and I'm pretty sure, we're the only school in the state that does this important event. Here at BL, we combine both Veterans Day and Memorial Day into one ceremony. Many of you are aware that Veterans Day was originally created to mark the ending of hostilities in the First World War, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. Over the years, it's been developed by our country into honoring veterans from all wars. In just a minute, the middle and upper school bands are going to play a medley of songs for each branch of service in our military. When I announce the branch, if you are a veteran in the audience, or any of the students or faculty who has a relative currently serving or has served in that branch, I would ask that you please stand for the playing of their song. Thank you. First song will be the Coast Guard. Normally during these ceremonies, we talk about our alums, our fellow students. This year we're going to do something a little bit different. This year we're going to honor our faculty and staff who have served in the military, who are currently working here at Boys Latin. Now before we get to that, I also want to remind you that at the conclusion of the ceremony, we're going to lay a wreath to our 25 alums who lost their lives in the service of their country. One of the most famous BL alums of all times is Mr. Jack Williams, class of 1938. I think everybody here knows who Jack Williams is. If not, you should. Shame on you. Mr. Williams, a 1938 graduate, really saved the institution and helped bring it here to Boys Latin. And that's why you're sitting here, because Mr. Williams had enough foresight and had enough influence to get the school relocated and started again here at Boys Latin. What most of you don't know is his service record. Mr. Williams was an ensign in the United States Navy in World War II, and he was a section leader in UDT Team number 11. UDT stands for Underwater Demolition Team, and I think some of you might know what that means today. That means Navy SEALs, before that term was created. I should also point out there are 2 BL grads right now who are currently serving in the Navy SEALs. And because of their mission and what they do, I'm not even going to tell you their name because they asked me not to. Now, Mr. Williams during World War II, as I said, served in the SEALs. And I guess the next slide here, let's see if we got the right one. Yeah. This is an interesting picture. This is what a UDT guy looked like during World War II. And a special note with this photograph, this was taken as a result of a mission that Mr. Williams led. This is a member of his team coming off the beach. Notice his attire. He's got a life belt, he's got a knife, and he would have had a mask, a snorkel, and fins. It's a pretty amazing thing what these guys did. They'd have to swim out, and a Zodiac would come up, and they'd throw a rope over the side, and hopefully they could drag them back to safety. Now, what I want to do right now is read from Mr. Williams' citation from the engagement from this photograph was taken. For heroic achievement as a section leader during a pre-assault demolition operation at Balikpapan in southeastern Borneo, 26 June to 30 June 1945. Notice it's not one day, it's over several days. He led his section through the water up to the beach, despite strong currents and heavy enemy shore fire, armed with what I showed you, a knife. And there supervised demolition operations that contributed materially to the success of the assault landing. His disregard for personal safety and his determination to complete his assigned mission gratefully affected this battle. It is with great pride and tradition that he received his Navy Commendation Medal for that. Currently, there are 6 members of our faculty and staff who have served our country. When I read their name, I will give you a brief bio and ask them to stand, and please recognize them when they stand. First, Mr. Nick Reese. Corporal, United States Marine Corps, Headquarters Battery, 10th Marine, 2nd Division. He served from 2008 through 2016, 4 of those years on active duty. Thank you, Mr. Reese. Next, Mr. Dyson Earhart. Mr. Earhart served as a gunner's mate on board the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Unimak. Mr. Earhart was on board during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he served from 1962 through 1970. Mr. Earhart. Mr. Richard Howard. Mr. Howard enlisted into the United States Marine Corps in 1970. He was a corporal in the 4th Engineer Battalion and served for 6 years. Is Mr. Ryan here yet? Where is he? Is he coming in? All right, he's not coming out. Next, and everybody knows Mr. Bill Ryan. Mr. Ryan enlisted in the United States Coast Guard and served from 1982 to 1989. He performed numerous duties and earned the rank of boatswain's mate 3rd class, which means you do everything, kind of what he does here at Boys Latin. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. A new member of the upper school faculty, Mr. Jeff Bowman. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 2003 and served until 2007. He earned the rank of sergeant while in the Marine Corps, while serving in the 2nd Battalion, 6 Marines. He was deployed to Afghanistan and to Iraq twice, where his unit was engaged in heavy combat operations. And our last distinguished guest is also our keynote speaker today, Mr. Matt Kaltrider. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 2009 and served until 2014. He served in 2 combat deployments during Operation Enduring Freedom as a sergeant in the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, 2nd Marine Division. I am honored to introduce your teacher and my friend, Mr. Kaltrider.
Good morning. When Mr. Maisel first asked if I would say a few words today, my immediate impulse was to say no. I've never taken to public speaking. In fact, the last time I was in this room talking in front of people, I was giving my 8th grade speech. I wasn't a fan of it then, and not much has changed. But a good friend of mine, who also happens to be an English teacher and a Marine, once told me that any time you're asked to speak about your service, you have an obligation to say yes. He added that you should take that opportunity to share stories about the people you served with and not waste a moment talking about yourself. So I'm going to do my best to follow his advice and spend most of our time today talking about some veterans who inspire me. But for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Mr. Kaltrider. I teach English in the upper school, and between high school and college I served in the military, as did a number of other faculty members. I joined the Marines when I was 18. It was something I'd been cautiously curious about since I was a kid, but it wasn't until 2004 that I seriously considered it. I was in 8th grade here when a Boys Latin alum, Nick Zolkowski, was killed in action in Fallujah, Iraq, the same place that Mr. Bowman fought. At the time, I didn't understand any of the politics surrounding the 2 wars that we were in. All I knew was that following 9/11, the nation asked for volunteers to go into harm's way, and Nick answered that call. I thought that was an honorable thing, and I still do. His sacrifice stuck in my mind, and when I was nearing the end of high school, I felt called to serve. But when I enlisted, it was mostly for selfish reasons. I wasn't really looking forward to sitting in college lecture halls or spending 4 more years confined to a classroom. Instead, I wanted to do things like drive cool vehicles, ride in helicopters, and shoot machine guns. I also thought that the dress blue uniform might help convince the girl I liked to go on a date with me. And it worked, by the way. We ended up getting married. But on a deeper level, I joined because I wanted to be tested in ways that you can't be tested in a classroom or on an athletic field. But while many service members, if they're being honest with themselves, do join in part for selfish reasons, most of them also go through a sort of shift at some point in their military career. Their goals and priorities change, And I can't point to a specific moment when it happened for me or for the guys that I served with, but we all began to prioritize the group's welfare over our own. Being of service eventually became the driving factor in everything that we did. This change happens to everyone who has a successful time in the military, and it happens naturally because your very survival can depend on it. I didn't realize my priorities had shifted like that until I transitioned from being on active duty to being a veteran. The most difficult part of that transition back into the civilian world is realizing that most people don't have that same outlook that veterans are accustomed to. We live in a society that celebrates individual achievement and ambition, and getting plucked from a culture that emphasizes teamwork over everything else can make for a rough adjustment period. However, the difficulty of that adjustment has been warped into stereotypes by the stories we see about veterans. When I tell people I'm a veteran, the reaction I get usually falls into one of two categories. Either I'm met with an outpouring of thank yous and praise from people eager to show their gratitude, which I'm grateful for, but they give it without any context about what my job was, where I went, or what my experiences were. Or it's met with an uncomfortable conversation, as if the military is taboo, or that they need to walk on eggshells and avoid sensitive subjects. They unintentionally frame that conversation as if I'm a victim of serving in the military. And both reactions feel inappropriate to me. I'm not deserving of praise for non-existent battlefield heroics, and I'm certainly not a victim of my service. That period of my life gave me some of my fondest memories, sweetest victories, and most fulfilling relationships. But that second reaction, that awkward space that develops, is not anybody's fault. Veterans are guilty of competing in the victim Olympics. I've been guilty of it at times. And I think it comes from the fact that we've been telling stories that frame veterans as victims for thousands of years. The Odyssey, written sometime between 750 and 650 BC, is a lot of things. But at its core, it's a story about a war veteran who struggles to come home. The stories we share about veterans haven't changed much in the 2,000 or so years since. Whether it's Rambo not being able to mentally come home from Vietnam, or Chris Kyle, the American sniper, coming back from Iraq only to go to a bar instead of to his friends and his wife and kids. That's the most common narrative we share about veterans. They go to war and they never fully come home. When Mr. Maisel asked me to speak today, he told me to reflect on what Veterans Day means to me. I don't think I can articulate what it means to me, but that narrative of veterans not being able to come home is the misconception I hope to change before we all leave here and get on with our day. Because the veterans in my life are so much more than victims of their service. Not only did they reintegrate into their communities after their time in the military, but the majority of them stand as examples the rest of us can look to for inspiration and how to be advocates for peace or how to better serve our own communities. Both of my grandfathers were Navy veterans. My dad's dad fixed radars and scraped paint on an aircraft carrier during the Korean War. After the war, he used the discipline he developed in the Navy and he put himself through night school. He went to class each night after working all day and without sacrificing time with his family. He studied business and eventually he built a successful company here in Baltimore. My other grandfather was a dentist in the Navy during the Vietnam War. He served for 30 years before retiring. But even after he left the Navy, he never stopped serving. He was a leader in his church, he helped run a local theater, and he volunteered his time to help create summer camps for kids. Both of them showed me how the military can instill a pride in serving others that lasts long after hanging up the uniform. But no one in my life has shown me more about what it means to be a veteran and how to continue serving than my friend Clark. On Easter Sunday, 2011, my unit was finishing up a mission in southern Afghanistan. On our way back to base, my friend Clark was catastrophically wounded. His injuries were so severe that he should not have survived. In fact, he died several times on the helicopter flight back to the hospital. But every time his heart failed, the medics were able to bring him back. He spent the next 4 years in the hospital undergoing countless surgeries, but he survived. Despite losing his legs, Clark never slowed down. He now owns his own home, he has a job, and he has a beautiful girlfriend. He's also the captain of his ice hockey team, and he's completed the Boston Marathon 4 times. I hope that inspires you. It certainly inspires me. But what I find most inspiring about Clark is that he continues to prioritize serving other people. He's involved in a number of charities and nonprofits, and he makes a point to volunteer in his community whenever he can. He refuses to be labeled a victim, and he refuses to stop serving. That is the part of Clark that deserves our admiration. Now, I've made a lot of sweeping generalizations about veterans so far, but the truth is veterans are as diverse as any large demographic. However, I think Clark's story is a much more accurate representation of your typical veteran than the two-dimensional stereotypes we so often see in movies and TV. Let's also remember that today was born out of Armistice Day, and the mood should be celebratory, not somber. On Veterans Day, make an effort to reach out to the veterans in your life, your friends, family, coaches, teachers, whoever. Seek them out. Ask them about their service. Find out what their job was and if they traveled anywhere. Ask them what their fondest memory of their time in uniform is. Let them know that you value their service. Then ask how they continue to serve. Whenever I speak to a veteran about their service, I always come away feeling inspired to work harder and to be grateful for the opportunities that I have. I hope that today and every Veterans Day, we each take a moment for self-reflection. Let's remind ourselves that serving is a privilege and think of ways we can be of more service to the communities that we're a part of. So thank you, happy Veterans Day, and to the Marines in the room, happy birthday and Semper Fidelis.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce Headmaster Post for his closing remarks. Mr. Post.
Fellas, good morning. I have a few words to share with you this morning before we conclude our assembly and proceed to the Alumni House for our annual laying of the wreath in front of the Alumni Memorial. First, thanks to Mr. Maisel for his efforts to coordinate today's assembly. It's always a special and important gathering for our school. Fellas, won't you join me in thanking Mr. Maisel? Please join me in thanking Mr. Kaltrider for his beautiful and poignant reflection. We thank you for your service to our nation and to our school, and we're grateful for the role that you play in the lives of our boys. Join me in thanking Mr. Kaltrider. Finally, join me in thanking Mr. Pisarczyk and our student musicians who played the medley of the various services this morning. Join me in thanking them. One of the things that I particularly appreciated in that portion of our program was how many of us stood at various points. The connections that we have are far more long-lasting than we might assume. I've shared with you before, and I'll say it again, that today is a challenging day for me because I know that our school does something very, very different than so many other schools. Across the area, perhaps across the nation, today will come and today will go. Schools will have classes, they'll begin and end, and for your peers elsewhere and their teachers, there's little to no recognition of Veterans Day. Mr. Maisel shared with you a history of today's remembrance rooted in the history of Armistice Day to conclude the Great War, what was to be the war that would end all wars. Perhaps your history teachers might engage you later today in a conversation about whether the incomplete and imperfect resolution of one conflict naturally leads to the next. Today's a reminder of the millions who serve and have served to protect the very freedoms that we also dearly enjoy, freedoms that include the ability to participate in the democratic process as active and engaged citizens. Today, we acknowledge and thank the many who've chosen to serve, who are willing to risk the ultimate sacrifice so that we may continue to be free. That shouldn't be some abstract concept. that you can't see or understand. Remember the many who stood earlier, whether they served or their family members and loved ones have served. Mr. Maisel had referenced over time the number of alumni who have served here at Boys Latin, and frankly, I've lost count of the young men whose diplomas I've signed in my tenure over more than 15 years, who've then taken an oath to protect and defend our nation, to defend and protect our freedoms, and to protect and defend us. In future years, we may say the same about you. I think that's why Mr. Colrider's comments about service are so meaningful today. Every veteran knows and understands that their work is truly service, oriented to others, to our nation, to a set of beliefs, values, and principles that enable all of us to enjoy the freedom to gather, to form our own opinions, and yet to even disagree. Every veteran understands that their service provides not just the physical protection of our nation, but the intellectual, the very moral protection of our nation, of our ability to hope, to wrestle with the most difficult questions, and especially to dream. That service is conducted without regard for personal safety or sacrifice. The words, "No greater love has a man than to lay down his life for another," are uttered reverently for our beloved alumnus, Nick Silkowski, and for so many others who valiantly served our nation, each of whom we would never know. Why? Because each so deeply believes in something larger, something greater. They believe in the values of our school and our country. Whether it's Mr. Colrider's own service, the service of his family members, or the very real sacrifices and service of his friend Clark, all those who serve know that they're connected to something larger and greater. Our work as your teachers and coaches and advisors is to help you realize that each of you individually is connected to something larger, connected to something greater. Words like courage and honor, duty and integrity, compassion and faithfulness, those are equally held within our school and by those who serve our nation. That connection to something larger and greater is the essence of our motto, esse quam moderi, to be rather than to seem. We cherish those three Latin words. We hold them here on our hearts. And I hope, too, that you heard Mr. Colrider's final words to his fellow Marines. Semper Fidelis, the motto of the Corps, always faithful, was adopted in the late 1800s and speaks to their commitment to ideals, to beliefs, to a position to serve at all times. As we conclude today, I hope you keep those two phrases in your mind, esse quam moderi and semper fidelis. May we always be faithful to the fundamental beliefs in courage, compassion, and integrity. May we always be faithful and cherish the extraordinary freedoms we enjoy, guaranteed by the service and the sacrifice of countless women and men who freely seek to ensure them. Let us never take them, their service, their commitment, and most of all, the freedoms that they guarantee. Let us never take them for granted. Thank you.
All right, we perform this ceremony every year. We pay respect to Boys Latin's 25 alums who have made the ultimate sacrifice. In a second, we're going to lay the wreath. We'll step back. We'll have a moment of silence, and then Mr. Pisarcik will play taps. When we dismiss from this place, I please ask that you would respect this ceremony and go in quiet off to your next class. As Mr. Coltrider said, think about our veterans today, maybe if it's only 30 seconds as you're going back across the class. So at this time, our president of our student body and Mr. Coltrider will place the wreath. Charlie. Thank you, everybody. You're now dismissed.